Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome very much to a panel that is speaking about the climate crisis and knowledge in action. We have some unexpected events to deal with this afternoon, in that one of our speakers has had to take her daughter to hospital. Fortunately, this has been in a significant advance, and she's been able to provide us with a video recording, well, not a video recording, but an audio recording of her presentation. So we will bring that to you. And we have currently not been able to connect to our speaker from Nigeria in Africa, but I know that people are working hard to bring her. So there are two of us on this panel, and I want to introduce you to Beth Caniglia, who is one of our speakers today. And Beth is currently serves as a senior scientist advisor on resilience and environmental justice for General Dynamics Information Technology, and is also editor in chief, I beg your pardon, Beth, editor-in-chief of the Solutions Journal in the USA, and a globalized, recognized expert in the area of regenerative urban development, with several books, I think up to 5 in her name. So she's a prolific writer as well as a very important influencer. So Beth, welcome and thank you for being here. I hope that our technical difficulties will be resolved. As the two other speakers we have, I'll just mention who they are. The first speaker, who unfortunately has to attend to her daughter in an emergency hospital operation, was to be Professor Sirkku Juhola, who was Professor of Urban Environmental Policy at the University of Helsinki in Finland, and also a guest professor in Sweden and Norway. She has been involved, like the keynote speaker, David Dodman, with the IPCC 6th assessment report and other formal reports from there. And she currently advises the Finnish government. As I mentioned, we will have her presentation available in a moment. Our third speaker was to be Dr. Immaculata Omojola, who is a Roman Catholic nun from Nigeria. She is currently director of the academic planning of Villanova Polytechnic in Nigeria, and has published numerous papers in journals specifically related to connecting climate change and the environment in Africa to links with formal education and internally displaced people, particularly in Nigeria, where she comes from. So I hope we'll be able to get Immaculata shortly. I would actually like and ask Beth's permission whether she would be willing to go first.
Oh, you're so kind, Cathy. I'm happy to go first.
Well, I think, Beth, that you will follow on from what David has been talking about. And I know you were in the session as well, which was regarding nature-based solutions. And I think that perhaps will give us a good start, and perhaps time for Immaculata to be able to get on board, and we can play Sirkku's contribution about coastal cities. Is that okay with you, Beth?
It is. It's wonderful.
That would be brilliant. Thank you very much. So I will hand over to you now.
So as Cathy mentioned, my name is Beth Caniglia. I work at General Dynamics Information Technology here in the United States, headquartered in Washington, D.C. However, I am speaking to you live from New Orleans, which is my hometown, and as many of you know, struggles from the perfect, storm, if you will, of urbanization, challenges of climate change, and intense inequality. And so this is, part of my passion in looking into regenerative cities and the importance of regeneration as we look to moving beyond sustainability, moving beyond sustainable development, as we're looking to create opportunities for shared prosperity on a healthy planet, if you will. And I think that this is really a nice follow-on to David. You know, there was a conversation about rapid urbanization. David mentioned that we're looking at very quickly very large numbers of people living in cities and no longer living in the countryside. Currently in the United States, for example, we're over 80% urbanized, and the rest of the world is rapidly urbanizing. We're at about 50% urbanization in the developing world, and quickly approaching, you know, people are expecting by 2050, approximately 70% of all people worldwide will live directly in cities or in their very close hinterlands. Another interesting issue with cities is currently 70% of all energy production is taking place in cities. And so if energy is one of the cruxes of solving climate change, then getting energy in cities right is a way to help us rapidly reduce the impacts of climate change. And so the concentration of cities gives us a lot of power and a lot of opportunity. However, on the unfortunate side, cities are also our primary bastions of inequality. The larger the city, the worse the inequality is, the larger the Gini factor, if you will, if you're into the statistics of measuring inequality. But in general, the larger the cities, the larger the challenges with inequality. And therefore, if we can get cities right, we can develop shared prosperity on an overall healthy planet. So how do we do this? You know, my argument has been for years that we need to move beyond sustainability toward the regenerative development framework. And the regenerative development framework, I've defined it for you here. Essentially, the plan is to move from a project-based or an individual problem-based orientation toward a systems orientation, one that looks at interaction effects, the interactions between environmental degradation and inequality, or environmental degradation and enhanced climate change, for example, looking at the ways that our various forms of capital, whether they be physical, natural, economic, or social, how they interact with one another in ways that can present abundance for all three. I mean, likewise, they can react in ways that bring about further inequality, further ecological damage, etc. But thinking in that way to try to put into relationship the economic, natural, social, and physical capital that we have in our possession in ways that are mutually supportive and create relationships and feedback loops that build abundance is the orientation of the regenerative framework. This requires a real change, a paradigm shift. So the first one that I mentioned already is that we shift from a problems-based orientation, or better, a project-based orientation, to a larger systems-based orientation. And so when we're looking at a project, for example, sometimes we piecemeal that project, you know, looking at, as David mentioned, a lot of folks in the room are in the planning field, you know, or architecture and design. When we think about a project, we're often looking at perhaps the architectural landscape of just that specific land plot, or the emissions that might come from that specific building. But when we move to a systems thinking orientation, we're looking at the way that project is embedded in an entire ecosystem, in a bioregion that has particular limits and loads that are already present. And so our orientation and design thinking changes from the solutions to problems and projects into a larger systems orientation. Another large paradigm shift that's required for regeneration to become a reality is the current system. You know, if we look at just the status quo, essentially we're looking at Earth and life, people and planet, being in service to the economy. The middle ground, which is sustainability, recognizes our limits to growth, but still prioritizes economic development over prosperity being shared among people in general. However, the large paradigm shift that we advocate for in the field of regeneration is to build an economy that is in service to life. And so this paradigm shift, that becomes our priority. And so we reframe our ideas away from the ways that we can keep growth going or that we can, feed the development machine. And instead we prioritize creating an economy that is in service to life. So there are some wonderful examples of this around the world, and I apologize for the blurriness of these images, but I really think that Kanjan Yu illustrates for us what this might look like in practice. So these are some of the transformations that his projects on sponge cities have made that I feel represent a regenerative alternative to our current development. A lot of times we may look at places like the picture on the left as wastelands. We think of our brownfields, places where we have had economic development in the past, particularly industrial development, that may have left places contaminated or, have left them not places where you would want to do economic development. But Kanjan Yu is showing us that we can use nature-based solutions, as David focused on earlier, to build places that not only regenerate us culturally and ecologically, but also economically. And these kinds of places exist. These are some of Kanjan Yu's other projects that he's worked on. And you can see how on the right here, this particular waterway has been, a really difficult place to develop because of flooding and other different kinds of ecological challenges. It's a difficult place to build buildings or encourage people to spend a lot of time. But if you look in the upper left-hand corner, then you'll see that this was a complete reconstruction of this zone designed to create opportunity for absorbing that water, building green infrastructure, and creating opportunity for further development along the area. So there are many opportunities that exist currently if we follow this model. So what's the theory of change here? The theory of change is that we apply our understanding of inequality, urbanization, and a variety of different ecological challenges, putting them in interaction with one another in ways that create shared prosperity on a healthy planet. So we want to catalyze increased shared prosperity and the health of humans and their natural environments using holistic design and meaningful community participation, also mentioned by David earlier. I feel like you've given my talk already, David, and I know you're here, so thank you. We also want to, and here's where I think regeneration and the regenerative development paradigm really offers us an opportunity to change our thinking and our innovative design. We need to foster positive feedback loops where the financial, the human, and the natural resources interact with one another in ways that build all three. And that's the critical piece, is being able to create these interaction effects where financial capital isn't just accruing to the top, for example, which is one of the outcomes that we see of the current system. Market forces, for example, preference those that have the ability to engage in and control the market. But we want other kinds of forces, ecological forces, equity forces, creative forces, and ecological forces to influence how our economy and prosperity and our ecological health are impacted. Similarly, the regenerative development framework comes away from a very abstract point of view. While I agree with what David said earlier, that we certainly need the external controls of the IPCC and other regulations, etc., what we found in regeneration is that the urban scale is one of the better scales for doing this kind of regenerative work, because it's the scale at which people, prosperity, and planet are the most tightly coupled. This doesn't mean we can't take regeneration to scale, but that this particular scale tends to be highly supportive of regenerative change, because people are in shared environments. They see the outcomes very tangibly. They're in touch regularly. For example, if there's a housing crisis, with seeing homeless folks on the street. They don't want to see that. They don't want to see people suffering. And I think that that connection between, our psychological, our physical, our human, sense of life, our economics, if you will, for the whole picture. Think about COVID. None of us were really able to exchange with other places the way that we did before. And this really put a spotlight on the importance of our local communities and our local cities for providing some source of economic vitality, shared experiences, feeding others who needed food. I think that this is the framework that kind of guides regeneration, and it was brought, into the spotlight when we experienced COVID-19. So there are critical worldview components that underpin the transition from sustainability to regeneration. And it requires certain shifts in the way that we see the world and the way that we prioritize outcomes that we want to see. So the first of these worldview components is the existence of a shared commitment to heal the social, economic, and environmental injustices that currently exist in our cities. We can't just start from here and create an alternative ending without also understanding the history of how we got here, and without having a sense of meritocracy can't work if we're not on a level playing field. And so frequently, the way that not only our local inequality is manifested in cities, but our international inequality around the world, is that we're not all starting on an equal playing field. And so we have to recognize the need to heal those injustices and bring to the forth, whether it be through reparations, economic, different kinds of ways of looking at economic prosperity, the shared economy. But we need to look at a commitment to healing those injustices. The second is that we need to prioritize regeneration in all the forms of capital. We need to regenerate our natural environment. We need to regenerate our human capital, our social capital, spiritual, all of the different kinds of networks that exist that help people to feel connected in the world, our just general sense of shared and collective identity, collective destination. Our physical infrastructure, such as our bridges, our roads, our various water infrastructure, and of course, our financial forms of capital, which currently rule the day. We need to also, for regeneration, center a bioregional frame. Again, because this is a more tightly coupled way of looking at the interaction between people, prosperity, and planet, is at the scale of the bioregion. So often watershed scale, for example, and comparing the watershed scale of the ecology to the socioeconomic scale of the city seems to be, one of the better scales at which to bring these features together. We need to build socially durable evolution, which refers to David's point that we need to connect in our communities. We need to allow our communities' voices to be heard, and particularly those who have been marginalized from our centers of decision making for so long, whether they be Indigenous communities, the poor, women, Folks who are illiterate, for example, very important, often excluded populations in our decision-making processes. The unhomed, the unbanked, so many of these folks, we really have to find ways of centering not only their needs, but also their creative ingenuity, their ideas. People who are closest to the challenges often have the best ideas or some of the most innovative ideas about how to move forward and make things different. And then finally, a focus on health and well-being of all people and ecosystems. If we can put well-being and health at the center of our priorities, we can put the economy in service to life. So there are a variety of enabling conditions.
We just need a couple of minutes more, if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm finishing up here. Sure.
Thank you.
So the enabling conditions of these, what we've seen as we try to implement regeneration, is that transparent and participatory governance structure, collaborative organizational culture, non-siloed behavior, which is sort of positive and abundant interactions between public and private, nonprofit and foundations, and educational institutions. All of these are precursors to sort of bringing about the type of interaction and sharing that we need to succeed. There are many other here. I know that Cathy and others will make sure that you have opportunities to access our presentations, and I'm happy to share this with you if you'd like. But creating these opportunities, they're designed to put people, prosperity, and planet into interaction with one another in ways that create abundance across the board. Shared prosperity on a healthy planet replaces economic growth as our priority, and cities and bioregions become the scale. And in focusing in this way, we can increase resilience to the climate crisis and other external shocks such as COVID and technological disasters. So thank you, Cathy, and thanks to everyone.
Thank you, Beth. Really very, very good. Lots of claps there. Thank you. I think we're fortunate enough to have Immaculata now. But Immaculata, if you are happy, I'd like to just take a couple of questions for Beth immediately. There's a very long one there from Belina, which we'll come to. But Beth, how one question very early we had was about how do you deal with the idiosyncrasies of society in systems-based thinking? So I think if we could deal with that one now, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, that's the exciting part and the greatest opportunity. And the idiosyncrasies of systems-based thinking, it's all about how you draw the boundaries of your system. So systems can be smaller. They can be at the neighborhood scale, for example. They can be at the household scale. A system can be at the municipal scale or at the national and global scale. And so as you decide where to draw your boundary, if your boundary is the municipality, for example, or the bioregion, as I recommend, putting those two together, then you're going to be looking at the cultural specificity, the financial opportunities, the availability of resources in that particular framework. You're going to be looking at the specific challenges that climate change presents for your ecology there. Is it fire? Is it flood? I moved from Denver, where fire was one of the primary problems, to New Orleans, where flood is now. Water is abundant. And so depending upon where you live, those idiosyncrasies of culture, as well as economy and ecology, come into focus.
Thank you, Beth. I think that's really, really very helpful to think about the systems thinking at different levels. I mean, one of the big challenges that we were hoping to face today, and I'm not sure if we have Immaculata yet.
Yes,
we do. Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
I'm here. I don't know
That's
if I'm
wonderful,
audible.
because one of the things I'd like to, I had made your introduction, Immaculata, but I'll do it again. And I think one of the big challenges is that was mentioned by David earlier, is the inequality in the capacity to actually deal with these things. And if we can take Immaculata's presentation now, we will see the stresses and strains that are actually happening on the front line of this in Africa. So Immaculata, are you able to start your presentation now? Immaculata, thank you. Just let me give you for others that may have joined later, that you are based in Nigeria and you're working very much with those people who are displaced by climate change, and have done an excellent piece for our city preparation for climate change book that we did last year. And I think it was absolutely enlightening to me to see the difference between the different forms of migration that was actually happening and the scale of it. So would you be able to turn on your camera, Immaculata? It would be helpful to see you.
My camera is not working.
No,
I don't know.
not working. Okay, well, let's go with the next best thing, which is your presentation, and we can hear you. Thank you very much, Immaculata. Please start now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I greet all the organizers of this conference that is coming at the time when the world is faced with a lot of climate change. And there are a lot of migrants coming because of climate change. And I welcome all participants to this conference. I encourage you to use this opportunity to learn more on what is happening around you. My name is Immaculata Omojola, and my topic is relocation and climate migration. Climate migration generally is the movement of people from one place to another, within or outside their country, because of changes in the weather or changes in the environment. This can be internal or international, depending on the purpose of migrating. If it is done within their own country, it is internal. And if they move to another country, it becomes international. A lot of causes of climate change. And
Immaculata, can you put your slides onto slideshow so we can see them larger? Okay.
Okay, so I just muted Immaculata while she fixes her technical issues. Go ahead and present your next speaker.
So this is a presentation from Professor Sirkku Juhola, who regrettably had to take her daughter to an emergency operation today and is unable to join us, but she kindly gave us an audio copy of her presentation for the panel today. So Nashli, if you could start that now, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
This really quickly.
You have to play.
There you go.
Cathy, for the kind introduction and also for the invitation to be present today.
That's Sirkku. She needs to be turned up a bit.
Unable to be there right now in person, but I hope this recording finds all of you well. My presentation today will focus on climate change adaptation in coastal cities. In particular, I want to give an overview of the risk profile of coastal cities globally, and I also want to talk about the state of adaptation and how it's progressing. Given the keynote speech that we have just had, I don't think I need to talk too much about the risks that cities are facing. But I want to show you this graph from the latest IPCC report to illustrate that when it comes to cities, settlements, and infrastructure, the impact is predominantly negative. This means that we are facing a loss of life, damages to infrastructure and key economic sectors everywhere in the world. Of course, for some coastal cities, this question is existential, particularly when it comes to small island states. Although there may be geophysical differences, as illustrated in this slide, in the types of small islands that exist, the worst case scenario almost always leads to managed retreat, relocation, and permanent loss of culture and traditions. While it is nearly impossible to give an overview of all the types of risks coastal cities face globally, but this illustration from the latest IPCC report comes close to showing this. It illustrates how location, geography, and socioeconomic development vary and matter in the formation of climate risk locally. On the left and right side in the dark panels, you'll see the potential impacts that a coastal city might face and for which adaptation is necessary. In the middle of the illustration, you'll see the different types of city and coastlines that can be identified globally. Now, the types of risks that emerge are also dependent on the socioeconomic state of the city and how it's able to adapt to these potential risks. To further show you risks of sea level rise to coastal cities, this IPCC graph shows you how much an increase in sea level rise, as shown by the changing color, will affect different regions of the world. The size of the circle indicates the number of people, coastline, wetlands, or transferred infrastructure affected by sea level rise. As you can see, while there are regional differences, there are no places where this is not an issue. These risks mean that we have to adapt, and we are already adapting in coastal cities and also other cities in the world. The latest IPCC graph also gives the best understanding of how much progress on adaptation we are currently making. It is clear that the current progress is enough. There are adaptation gaps between the current levels and the levels that are needed. Most of the observed adaptation is fragmented, it's incremental and sector specific, and it responds to current impacts rather than future risks. Most importantly, observed adaptation is unequally distributed across regions, meaning that some regions globally are better prepared than others. But there is also another gap between lower income population groups in most countries and those that are better off, who are more prepared for future impacts. Our own research in my group also shows this. We examined close to 1,000 adaptation initiatives from 402 cities, not exclusively coastal cities, of over 1 million people. What we try to examine is who steers who and with what types of policy instruments. And what we show, as you can see on the graph on the right, is that the public sector mainly steers itself through strategies. So most of adaptation takes place within the city strategy and its activities. But when adaptation progresses, so the further the city goes along in implementing adaptation, it's likely to involve other stakeholders in adaptation processes. This is when the private sector is engaged through partnerships with the city government, through financial incentives or other types of measures. Citizens are less likely to be involved in this, and they are mainly only provided information, not financial incentives or other types of support to adapt. Our research and other previous research has shown that translating many of these global drivers and risks into translatable action on the ground is very challenging, particularly in cities where there is little capacity to plan forward. For this reason, David Major, my colleague, and I have written a guidebook for citizens, public officials, and planners in order to help them to identify what they need to do. In this book, we propose an assessment steps, 8 in total, which help and guide planners in particular to identify what the key risks in the area are, understand what infrastructure is at risk, characterize this risk, and start to quantify the types of measures that are needed, develop initial adaptation strategies, and crucially identify opportunities for coordination, try to understand what the financing for this adaptation needs to be, prepare and implement, and monitor and reassess. This book is freely available. It's an open access book by the University of Helsinki. As the implementation of adaptation continues to progress, it is also necessary to pay attention to its impacts, particularly from the viewpoint of justice. Also a key theme in this year's COP. The key issue here is to what extent justice is considered in the planning, implementation, and monitoring of adaptation. For this reason, we defined key dimensions of just adaptation, as you can see on the left-hand panel, and also assessed how 4 different cities account for justice in their current planning. What the results show is that procedural justice is predominantly accounted for, meaning that citizens and other stakeholders are involved, at least to some degree, in the planning of adaptation. Most cities have an idea of what and the impacts and how differentially they are distributed and unjustly distributed in the city, but there is little attention to recognitional justice or considering adaptation as a way to restore past injustices in the city. While I feel like I have been somewhat negative in my presentation, illustrating the key risks and challenges that we face, and also the relatively poor performance in implementing adaptation, and I have highlighted the adaptation gap, I still want to end on a positive note. While cities and settlements, as stated by this IPCC quote, are at the front line of climate change, they are also key sources of innovation and climate resilient development. And the IPCC says this with high confidence, so it's a worthy statement to take up on. And I'm sure that my fellow speakers in this panel will be able to give you more examples of this. Thank you very much for your attention.
I know that Sirkku is not here, but I'll thank her for preparing that presentation for us anyway. And I think we're getting similar messages through from building on the keynote address that we had from David earlier, in that we are really talking about the biggest challenge lying with the inequalities that people experience in cities. And this is multiplied and compounded by the potential for climate impacts, whereas actually we are perhaps not actually pushing enough into the adaptation for those poorer communities and to address those inequalities. So interesting challenges, I think, emerging. I believe that Immaculata may be ready to do her presentation now. Is that correct or not? Beth, would you like to come back in the meantime and
I'm sorry, I think that we are not going to be able to have her. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure.
Well,
keep going.
Well, let's hope that we can get Immaculata back at some point. So I managed to lose the question I was going to ask you. Do you have any comments on what came through from Sirkku that you would like to make? Any comments there?
Absolutely. That was such a really poignant presentation, not just for coastal cities, but in general for the way that we are organizing our adaptation strategies.
Yes,
oh, it looks like we have Immaculata.
Yeah.
I'll defer to her. We definitely want her presentation.
Yes, because of the timing. Immaculata, would you be ready now?
Yes, if you can see my screen, I am ready.
We can't see your screen at the moment.
Hey, Jesus Christ.
We have your voice and we have your picture. Would you like to just read us through it, talk through it?
Okay, let me just talk straight, please.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. So I have greeted the organizers of the program, and I want to explain that climate migration is about people moving from one place to another, within and outside their country, depending on the purpose of migrating. It can be internal or international. It is internal when it is done within their country, and it is international when they have to move out of their country. And there are reasons. There are a number of reasons for climate change. many scholars have agreed that people generally are responsible for climate change through industrialization, deforestation, and population. Through industrialization, in the process of preserving their land and making the environment beautiful, they contaminate water and the land. And deforestation, when they cut trees, they forget to plant another one. And forgetting that plants are windbreakers. When there is storm, this destroys houses and they become displaced. Apart from that, there will be erosion if deforestation is common and flooding. Population is another fact. If the environment is overpopulated, there will be air pollution and there will be a lot of noise. All these are climate change. Other factors are volcanoes, variations in sun's energy, and decay of organic matters. We are looking at the impact of climate change on migration. Climate change and migration are so related. And migration is a quick answer to climate change, especially if it comes in form of drought and flooding. There will be no water and there will be no food. And this will increase contagious diseases. People are displaced, especially when erosion destroys their houses and properties. Also, when there is war and hostility in the environment, they move to an unknown land. The another impact is ill health, especially when temperature is high. That can cause skin cancer. Stagnant water harbors mosquitoes, causing malaria. Climate change can equally cause trauma and infections and lack of proper nutrition. This one we'll be talking about economic migration and refugees. Those that are migrating because of economic are those moving to seek greener pasture because of the economic situation, harsh economic situation in their country. They move to seek refuge somewhere to make money. Apart from this, they move without their families. In the case of refugees, they move with their families and they move because of famine. They move because of flood, earthquake, violence, conflicts, and persecutions. Some of them move outside the country, and these people are eligible to asylum. And others move within their countries, and they are kept in IDPs. Then, the work of HAFUL in 2021, it has identified a lot of displaced people and countries affected in Africa. First of them is Ethiopia, which in 2018 has about 100 million internally displaced people. Then Cameroon has 459,000 people displaced. Democratic Republic of Congo, 1.8 million of people displaced. Somalia has 578 people displaced in 2018. Central African Republic has about 510 people displaced. In Nigeria, to date, there are a lot of displaced people. 541 people are reported, 600 were reported dead at a stage. And we are still faced with the problem of climate change and migration coming out of flooding, apart from bandits and kidnapping that has been there. This work is actually advocating for relocation for these climate migrants, that wherever they are, there should be proper accommodation so that their life will be meaningful. Education should be given to them and taken to wherever they are. It can be done online depending on the situation of the place. And not forgetting that unemployment is an outcome of migration and climate change. People should be trained and retrained so that they can fit into the society. Health provision should be done for them because without sound health, migrants cannot perform. Then, above all, there should be job opportunities so that they can fit into the society. We are now recommending that government and well-meaning individuals should be sensitive to climate migrants around them and make provisions for how they can be resettled or reabsorbed into the society to enjoy better living. Apart from this, there should be policies formulated in favor of women and children, since they are vulnerable. Because during migration, girls are exposed to early sex and teenage pregnancies. And apart from this, children can easily contract sicknesses. Then, we are suggesting that whenever host countries are planning anything for migrants, it should be done in line with accommodation, healthcare, education, and job opportunities. Then we are encouraging economic migrants to schedule jobs before leaving their countries and those countries, so that they will not be stranded. And we encourage those countries to welcome them because they are stranded. Then, in conclusion, this has been established that climate change is related to migration, with particular reference to economic migrants and refugees. It provided insight to situations of migrants during climate change. It also focused on how they could be relocated and be comfortable in their new society, in line with accommodation, education, health, and job opportunities. Apart from this, since men are the major causes of climate change, we are proposing that there are more awareness by the government to tell people and stating the effects of all these practices on the future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Immaculata. I'm so sorry you've been having technical difficulties. Because may I just ask you to repeat those numbers which you gave us? I thought they were absolutely astounding. There were 100 million people, did you say?
That what? So, excuse me.
The numbers that you gave of people who were displaced from, like, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Central Africa.
Okay.
Those numbers, they're absolutely astounding.
Okay. Now, in Ethiopia in 2018, according to the report of AFUL in 2021, it reported that 100 million people are internally displaced.
Is that in Ethiopia itself?
Yes, that is the report.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Then the second one is Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah.
Now, 1.8 million people were displaced in 2019.
How many?
1.8 million.
1.8 million.
Yes, were internally displaced.
Right. These are huge numbers. Yeah, Nigeria, did you have?
Nigeria has 541 million displaced, apart from 600 that were reported dead at a stage because of flooding. 600 people died.
600 people died, and is that in the recent floods? Yes.
Yes, that's the one we are experiencing in Nigeria.
The ones that you have at the moment. Yes.
Yes.
These, perhaps Beth, you might like to join us again. I mean, these figures are absolutely astounding. That I don't think we have got a real sense of the capacity that we need to deal with this. And as climate change progresses, perhaps, this is just going to, well, not perhaps, but it is probably going to become even more. So, I mean, there is such a variety of the things that we need to do, and such a differential, in a sense, in terms of, while I know you're sitting in New Orleans, and in New Orleans, thousands of people were disrupted by Hurricane Katrina.
Yes.
How on earth do we even think about getting to the scale that Immaculata is talking about, of displaced people in countries which are already struggling for their economy and for resources? It's a huge challenge. Immaculata, you've talked about jobs, so is economic development and growth becomes a really core thing to do. But what about the countries? I mean, I'm sitting in a country that is currently facing real challenges on the migration front and not willing, and I know in the United States there's similar things. How on earth, where on earth do we take the solutions for this type of displacement going forward? Because it is something that's not really being handled at the moment. Beth, you have any thoughts on?
Well, I think, you know, again, it's at the different scales, Cathy, and Immaculata definitely is more the expert in this area than me. But I know we need the structural level, international guidelines. We need the national priorities to come into line in those nations that are experiencing the largest displacement. And then in general, we need to understand that most of climate change is impacting the most vulnerable people first and worst. And being able to reorient ourselves around that framework of shared prosperity on a healthy planet helps us to look at the kinds of nature-based solutions, the types of economic solutions, the housing solutions, the transportation and health solutions that are required. All of these are required to create a system of feedback loops.
Yes, indeed. I think we are, I think sometimes we don't, if we don't experience it, and my experience of working in Africa in the past led me to realize that although intellectually I recognized the challenges, actually emotionally and reality, I did not recognize it until I saw it firsthand. And I guess, Immaculata, that is a bit of a challenge when you come to conferences, well, not so much like this, but COP27. How do you bring that reality to these people? You know, it's very challenging for you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, I'm here to get the question, please.
I'm just saying, how do we bring the reality of the numbers and the challenges that you're facing there in Africa with displacement to events like COP27, when we have people who are not experiencing that on a day-to-day basis?
Well, since some people are more affected than others, we keep encouraging those who are not affected. That's why we are asking NGOs to pay attention to them in case they have more to share. Because it is not just saying it, it is a reality.
Yes.
And being a real situation, that there should be people to help. Governments will try, because we see governments taking palliative to camps and others to help them. But we are encouraging others to come and assist them to get out of this mess.
Mm. And I think, Beth, you're absolutely right that wherever we are, it seems to be the most vulnerable who are actually most affected by it. And I have a saying which I use often, that the poor actually pay the highest price for any of these disruptions. And you know,
True.
I think we haven't quite got to those bigger solutions yet. Now, you know, I think we're actually out of time. So I apologize to all participants for the disruption of the event, but this is reality. We have someone who has to take care of their family, and we have Immaculata there in Nigeria, where there are communication problems. And Beth, thank you for stepping in so readily into that slot. And Immaculata, I want to thank you especially for persevering and for giving us your view. We will take your presentation and we will ensure that we can share that with others, and it will not be lost in this conference. So thank you for your time, your perseverance, and I look forward to working with you in the future again, as we have done in the past.
Thank you very much, Cathy.
Thank you, Cathy.
And thank you for encouraging me to persevere.
Yeah, no.
I thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you to Sirkku, whom I hope may be listening, but I hope that her daughter is doing well, and this is life in reality that we are seeing, and in many cases only made more challenging in every dimension by the climate crisis that we are really facing now. So thank you all again. And we're having a break now for a short part. And it reconvenes at, I use UTC time, 15:45 UTC, 11:45 a.m. Puerto Rico time. And I hope that many of you will join us again after the break. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience and your perseverance. Thank you. Thank you to speakers in particular. Thank you.
Kathy.